I kind of felt more and more isolated because, I was in mass with all of these huge families with 10, 12 kids, and they were all sitting perfectly in the pew. And I had a circus, with just my 3. And so I felt like, my goodness, I am not a good Catholic woman. I felt like I had really caused all of this, that I had made mistakes. There is always a genetic predisposition. There may be environmental factors that will trigger that to turn on. We are all unique and unrepeatable, and everybody has something. So the way things look on the outside are very seldom how they are on the inside.
So 3 times a week, I send women a short text to help them be more present in their everyday lives. And I want to read you something from one of them. Angelica said, "I joined during a time in my life that felt like I was drowning. A special needs mom struggling with a deep sense of isolation and little hope. These simple texts have been such a gift. Just a few times a week, they offer small, attainable ways to keep daily life centered on Christ. They remind me so much of the little way. That holiness doesn't have to come from grand gestures, but from small acts done with love. It's been a beautiful and realistic way to keep my faith present in the middle of ordinary life." That is what 16 cents a day can do for you. The question is, what's it costing you to keep living on autopilot? Visit catholicwoman.co/present to learn more and join. That's catholicwoman.co/present. You're listening to the Catholic Woman Podcast, the show where Catholic women navigate the modern world together. I'm your host, Marie Hanson, and welcome back to the show, friends. Or if it's your first time, welcome in. I'm so excited. Today is an interesting conversation. We're going to be talking with Ginny Cochis about kind of neurodivergency and both adults and kids. She mostly focuses on kids, but I've had many adult friends who have been diagnosed ADHD or other things in their adult years, and they just never realized that they were a neurodivergent person. So I am very eager to dive into this conversation today with Ginny. But before we do, I would just love to remind you to please subscribe to the show if you're not already subscribed. So many of our listeners, I can see the downloads, are not actually subscribed to the show. So just go check your Apple Podcasts, your Spotify, your YouTube, wherever you're listening or watching. Just make sure you're subscribed to the show. That way you can help bump us and get us out to more Catholic women. So thank you so much for being here. And without further ado, I would love to introduce Ginny. So Ginny is a Catholic author, educator, and neurodivergent parent coach, but most importantly, she's a wife and mom of 3 neurodivergent kids, a former secondary level English teacher and adjunct professor of developmental English. Ginny holds a Master of Arts in teaching, writing, and literature, and has over 2 decades of experience educating the neurodivergent. She founded the Quirky Catholic Kids website and community in 2017, where she provides practical support and prayerful encouragement to Catholic moms raising neurodivergent children. So Ginny, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited for this conversation. I first, came across Quirky Catholic Kids when you reached out to me, and I was like, this is a really, really cool idea. Yeah. Now, I have so many different avenues I'd love to dive into today, but first, I'd love to know more about you and how you got into this work. So who is Ginny, and how did you get into teaching about neurodivergency, especially with kids, but just in general in the Catholic world?
Sure. You read my bio, so I'm trying to in my head to think, how do I not repeat this? But yeah, no, I had, I've been married to my husband. We met in college, and we've been married, 23, 24 years almost. And so I had this specific idea of how my marriage, how my motherhood, my life my vocation as a married woman was going to look. And it didn't turn out that way at all. Because I was picturing a 1950s holy card, and that's just not how it was. We had our first kiddo, and she was amazing. She started talking really early, around 9 months. She was, speaking in full sentences by a year. She was a great, amazing artist. And she taught herself to read when she was 4 years old. She went into kindergarten reading books like The Hobbit. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have the star of the Catholic school. And I did not. She had a really hard time. I was getting phone calls home almost every day. On the good days, it was like, hey, we just want to let you know that she ran from the classroom again. And on the bad days, I could hear her screaming and wailing and crying in the background, just totally out of control. And I thought, of course, I thought it was all my fault. Like, I thought that I had done or not done something, I'd done something wrong or not done something very important that I should have done in raising her. So I felt very alone. I could not figure out what was going on, because when I was a kid, the last thing I wanted to do was get in trouble. So, I towed the line very carefully. But it turns out that she, after an evaluation, was identified as twice exceptional, which means that she's intellectually gifted, but she also has a developmental disability. So she was identified under the Asperger's umbrella. They no longer use that term. She's 19 now. They use level 1 autism, not impacting language or intelligence. So that kind of opened up my eyes to what was going on. I didn't accept it right away. I had a lot of denial. But as we had additional children, each with their own diagnoses, I kind of felt more and more isolated, because, I was in mass with all of these huge families with 10, 12 kids, and they were all sitting perfectly in the pew. And I had a circus, with just by the time, we had reached our full family, I just had 3, And so I felt like, my goodness, I am not a good Catholic woman. I'm not a good Catholic mom. I don't, have the right family. And so I started writing about it, trying to process my feelings. And this was like in 2017 when blogging was still a thing. And the more I wrote, the more people started reaching out to me saying, oh my gosh, you're describing my life. And so I think that is how it started. I began to try to carve out a space in Catholic communities for those of us who up until that point had felt marginalized. So giving us a place to be welcomed, to sort of understand that just because we don't look typical doesn't mean we aren't striving toward holiness. So that's a long drawn out answer, but
Yeah.
I hope that
No,
helps.
I love that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love hearing the personal story, because that just really helps understand why you became passionate about this. Why is this a topic that you're into? And I really appreciate you sharing all of that, because I think there are many people listening who have kids in similar situations, or maybe they themselves were that kid and they just never got the help that they needed.
Right.
So we hear the term, and you use the term neurodivergent, but I think that covers a lot of different things. So can you explain that term a little bit before we go deeper?
Yeah, neurodivergent is not a medical term. It's not a scientific term. It's kind of like a catch-all, just vocabulary, an umbrella for those individuals whose brains are wired in a way that is not considered typical. So, there's like the standard biological wiring of the human brain. And then there are those of us, myself included, who the neurons are connected differently. There are different variations in chemicals, like in the ability to uptake dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and all of those things impact how a neurodivergent individual takes in, processes, and then expresses the information and the stimulus they receive from the world. So that's kind of like the details, explanation. But I think what it covers is anyone who has ADHD, anyone who is intellectually gifted, because that is also considered neurodivergent, the autism spectrum, which is incredibly broad and wide, which, is a whole nother thing that I could talk about for hours.
Yeah.
But like OCD, dyslexia, Tourette's, dyspraxia. So any sort of, I guess, learning or developmental difference in which the brain is wired in a way that is not considered standard. So.
Okay. So you kind of covered this a little bit, but can you talk about, for people who don't really know all of those terms or may not know, some of those terms, what are kind of the most common signs we may see in our kids or just in adults or siblings, family, whatever in general of neurodivergency? What are just like the signs we may see?
Yeah, there are some certain like specific things you'll see across the board. Executive function is one of them. That is when a person is able to, well, it's the set of neural processes in which we are able to organize our spaces, our homes, our lives, just like, so when people tend to be a little disorganized, that's kind of an executive function issue. Or being able to follow multiple step directions. Many people who are neurodivergent have difficulty with working memory. And because working memory controls the ability to follow one step after another, you may find that those people are easily distracted, or they have a hard time following through or regrouping when faced with a challenge. Other things you'll find, sensory sensitivities are a big one. For me personally, growing up, like I made my mother late for work almost every morning for my Catholic school because, she was taking me to school and I would not wear my uniform socks because the seam on the toes was so uncomfortable. It was like I thought I was going to die. So that's one sign. Sensory sensitivities, but also sensory seeking, needing to swing a lot. Having a stim. So like maybe you shake your hands or maybe you chew on something or you fidget. Another sign would be having a hard time regulating emotions, especially in kids. I think it's easier once you become an adult because you've matured. But being able to express what you're feeling in what's considered an appropriate manner, that's another one. So a lot of neurodivergent kids have meltdowns, which are, very different from tantrums. Meltdowns are longer, more intense, and they usually don't stop until the kid like falls asleep. So yeah, those are some of I'm trying to think if there's anything I've missed. But those are a couple of the big, like, I don't want to say red flags because they're not red flags, but the big signs that you may be dealing with some sort of neurodivergence. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Okay. So let's say a mom is seeing these signs in her kid. What would be, and I want to talk about labels later because I think you two like have you've just talked about like what it means to have a label and all of these different things.
Yeah.
But let's first talk about what does the diagnosis and advocacy process look like if a mom is feeling like her kid may have, these signs or just, I don't know, is questioning, what should she do?
Yeah. And I think it also, like, I think this applies for kids and adults too. So if a mom is feeling like, she may have one of these conditions, I think the same, information that I'll give you is relevant. Okay. I think the place to start is to consider, quality of life. Like, is your family suffering? Is your child suffering? Are you having a hard time just being a family together or even just living your life? Okay. And if the answer to that question is yes, then you probably want to seek out an evaluation. And you can start by, a lot of moms will start with their pediatrician, getting a referral out to either a private practice, a neuropsych practice, or a children's hospital, or what's the other? Developmental pediatrician. All of those, can do an evaluation. You can even go to like a psychology practice, so not necessarily a neuropsych. That's one way. You can also go through your local school district. It doesn't matter, whether you're homeschooling or whether you're in a private school or, even if you're in the public school system. In the United States, as a taxpayer, you have the right to access a psychoeducational evaluation through your county schools. So you can contact them and then, submit a request for what they call an eligibility meeting. And then you go in and, they'll have you fill out paperwork and all that kind of stuff. And if they see that there's a need, they'll do the evaluation for you. And then there are, once you go through the evaluation, I think having that answer opens a lot of doors because it gives you, for yourself, if you feel like you are neurodivergent, or for your kids, it gives you avenues to improve your daily functioning on your own terms. Because I'm really big on agency. I think it's important that we help kids understand that the way they are created is perfect in and of itself. God does not make flawed human beings. We are good inherently. And so the purpose is to give neurodivergent kids the tools they need to navigate a neurotypical world on their own terms. So to be able to fit into, if they want, or work with kind of a society that's not really built for them in a way that makes them feel comfortable. So.
Okay, that's very helpful. So I know some people are hesitant to label it or even get a diagnosis because
Mhm.
they just feel like that can almost be hindering in some sense. So I like that
Sure.
you're talking about agency and like almost like if you would prefer to do nothing, like that's your, your choice.
Yeah.
It's up to
Mhm.
you. So, but what has it been like to, go through this process, get the labels, get the diagnoses, and then what has that meant spiritually for you? And do you have
Yeah.
any guidance to offer people who are going through this process, or once they do get a label, what steps should they take both spiritually and, in their actual life?
Sure. And this is something I actually talk about in my book, Quirky Catholic Kids, that just came out. But I think there's a mindset shift that has to take place because there's a lot of grief that can come with that. The idea that the life that you are leading is not the life you thought you were going to have. And I think there is a lot of anger. In some cases, I think you can feel one of two ways. You can be really angry that, this is the way things turned out, or you might feel a sense of relief that finally you have an answer. Because I think, one of the things that we find in secular circles and in Catholic circles too is the idea that getting a diagnosis is going to brand your child for life, that it's this label that's going to follow them forever. And I think the reality of that is that a label is a stereotype. It is something that it brands your child in one way. But what a diagnosis does, as I mentioned previously, is it opens those doors. And if a child needs accommodations in their school, if, like my oldest, my 19-year-old, she's in college, she has accommodations through the Office of Disability Resources. But, again, that's all on her terms. It's what she decided. I think spiritually, for me, I had to lean a lot on God's grace because I felt, I mentioned before that I felt like I had really caused all of this, that I had made mistakes as a woman, as a wife, as a mother. And so God worked on my heart a lot to kind of soften it and help me understand that this is his design, that this is the way he created my child, and that the more I lean on him and the more I come to him with how I feel about all of this, the better he will work through me, if that makes sense. Like I'll be a better
Mm-hmm.
advocate for my kids if I am continually leaning on him and surrendering to him. Because I'm a control freak. I want to be in control of what my life is like. But God consistently reminds me that that's not really my place. So,
Yeah, that's really helpful. So I know it can feel isolating as a Catholic mom
yeah.
when your kid doesn't fit in, whether they're neurodivergent or not, if they're just getting
Mhm.
bullied or not, a part of their friend group. It can feel really isolating and hurt. Like there's no, it hurts when you're getting bullied, but it hurts on a
Sure.
deeper level when you see your kids going through these difficulties and
Absolutely.
challenges and struggles.
Yeah.
So, do you have any like advice or helpful guidance for these moms or women who are navigating this with their kids, but especially, navigating part of this is heartbreak, the heartbreak that comes with this?
Mhm. Yeah, it's hard to find your people, and I think that's what we are made for. We're made for community, as part of the body of Christ. But the good thing is that there actually are a lot of Catholic moms out there with kids who are different, And
Yeah.
I think for me, part of it was letting go of my fear of how other people perceived me, and then taking everything personally. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not easy to do. It's taken me
Yeah.
probably the better part of 2 decades to come to that realization. And I'll be honest, like it's not a consistent thing. There are times when even now I still kind of have a really strong reaction to how I think people might perceive my kids or what someone might see or what someone might say. But I think the main thing is to remember that we are all unique and unrepeatable, and everybody has something. So
Mm-hmm.
the way things look on the outside are very seldom how they are on the inside. So your perception of the people around you is 90% of the time not the truth. And so they're not looking at you They're not judging you. And I had this like experience in real life. I was in a homeschool group when my third was born. And I remember one of the moms, she had been homeschooling for years. She has like 12 kids. She came over. She had just had a baby around the same time as me, but this was like her ninth child. So she, and he was like really seasoned and I was still kind of struggling. But she, brought her baby and she brought the meal for me. And I remember sitting down on the couch with her while we were visiting. And, I told her, I said, like, I don't feel like I belong. I only have 3 kids. They're all a little strange. We're not filling up the pew and sitting like consistently quietly. And she looked at me and she said, Ginny, nobody is thinking that about you. We're just happy to know you. We're glad to know you. And that was a key moment, I think, in changing my mindset about how I felt about myself and then the way other people perceived us. So I think that's what I would say is that what we imagine in our own heads is usually much worse than what the reality is.
That is true.
Yeah. And so as far as like bullying and stuff, I mean, definitely that's something you want to take into, you want to talk to somebody about that. You want to talk to the principal, you want to talk to the kid's mom, however, you can contact the person in charge and make a difference there. Obviously you want to do that. But I think a lot of it is also imagined. So
Those Who Mourn magazine is a monthly online magazine that points people who are grieving to the abundant treasury of goodness, truth, and beauty found in the Catholic faith. Through personal stories, wisdom from the scriptures and saints, glorious hymns and prayers, poetry, and beautiful artwork, Those Who Mourn helps you lift your heart and mind toward the eternal and fix your eyes on Christ, the source of our hope and comfort. The creator of Those Who Mourn understands that grieving takes time. You'll find stories and saintly writings that allow you to slow down from the busyness of everyday life and carve out some time to process your pain. And if you'd like some support along your grief journey, our online community is a wonderful place to find encouragement, connection, and practical tools to help you process and heal after the death of a loved one. Visit thosewhomournmag.com and discover a balm for your broken heart that's rooted in our beautiful Catholic faith. That's thosewhomournmag.com. If you're anything like me, you want to care for your body the way God designed it, simply, naturally, and without all the junk we really don't need. That's why I love North Idaho Tallow. Their skincare is made the old-fashioned way using grass-fed beef tallow, which closely mimics our skin's natural oils. No harsh chemicals, no synthetic fragrances, just nourishing ingredients that actually work. As a busy mom, I really don't have time for complicated routines, and I want something safe for my family. Gentle enough for sensitive skin and effective. North Idaho Tallow checks all those boxes for me, from their deeply moisturizing balms to their clean traditional soaps. If you've been wanting to simplify your skincare and choose something wholesome and thoughtfully made, I really encourage you to try it. I absolutely love it, and I have their tallow on right now. You can visit northidahotallow.com and use the promo code MARIE10 for 10% off your order. That's MARIE10 for 10% off. It's a small way to care for yourself so you can keep pouring into everyone else. Alison Ramirez is the founder of Trinity Tree Publishing, a small business dedicated to helping Catholic authors write, edit, and self-publish their faith-based books. She has degrees in English and theology and is an award-winning author set to release her 7th book this year. She is the author of the Rosary Invitation series of 4 devotionals and the Divided Kingdom Christian Young Adult Dystopian trilogy. Within her small business, she works primarily with authors through the book editing process and as a one-on-one coach through self-publishing. She has newsletters on Substack, a YouTube channel on book publishing from a Catholic perspective, and a podcast where she interviews other authors on their publishing journeys. Alison is passionate about helping authors bring the true, good, and beautiful books the Lord has placed on their hearts out into the world. You can connect with her via her website at trinitytreepublishing.com. And I just have to say, this Mother's Day, whether you're a biological mother, foster mother, adoptive mother, godmother, or just spiritual mother to so many other women out in the world, I highly recommend checking out this little gift to yourself of publishing that book that's always been on your heart. At least begin to explore the process. So check out Alison. Again, you can find her at trinitytreepublishing.com. Yeah, that's a good point. And we're always our own worst critics. So I do think we make a lot of things up in our head about what people are
Yeah.
thinking. That's very true.
Yeah.
So, your ministry and book challenge some of the common Christian parenting narratives, like the idea that behavior is always a matter of discipline and virtue.
Mhm.
So why
Mhm.
is it important to challenge that narrative?
I think because behavior is communication. And if we're looking at a child who is having a meltdown and just assuming right away that that kiddo is misbehaving or a spoiled brat, we're not meeting that kid's needs. And so I think you have to be aware that in certain situations, a child's behavior is not going to be a direct sign of their ability. So, what I mean by that is, like, let's say you ask your kiddo to go upstairs, get the laundry basket, come downstairs, separate the whites and the darks, start the white load, and then go and take the trash out. 10 minutes go by, you come downstairs and you discover that the laundry is on the floor in 2 piles, but the load hasn't been started and the trash is overflowing from the trash can. So immediately the gut reaction is to get angry because, like, oh my gosh, my kid just totally didn't do what I asked them to do. That's awful. But in reality, if you have a kid with ADHD, when I was talking about working memory earlier, that's a multi-step problem. So the kid has to go upstairs, get the laundry, bring it down, sort the 2 things, start one load, take the trash out. That's like 5 or 6 steps. And usually a brain that struggles with working memory can only handle 1, 2, or 3 steps at the most without some sort of reminder or written instructions. So in that case, the kid isn't trying to be defiant. The kid really simply could not perform the task the way that it was asked of them. So I think that's one thing that's really important to remember. And I think if you look at it from the perspective of how long has your child been performing this task? Like, have you done it with them? Have they been able to complete it, by themselves for like the last 6 months? And then they just decide not to? Well, then that's a matter of discipline. If they haven't really been completing this task, or that they, as far as their ability goes, they're not capable of doing it on their own, that's a matter of development. And the 2 things don't negate each other. Development doesn't negate discipline. Discipline doesn't negate development. But I think you have to be able to help your child develop the skills they need in order to meet the things that you're asking of them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that really does. And that made me think of, so recently my daughter has been in a dance class. She's 3 and she has loved it. And there was an incident that happened that has caused major anxiety. And we've tried 3 weeks in a row. She has not been able to go back. This last time, gave her the teacher screaming for the whole 15 minutes, just panicking, freaking out. And someone had made a comment on the outside, we're watching, like, they need to just put her in a corner. She's just trying to get attention. And so I know those mindsets are out there. So how do you respond when people say that? And like, this happened to be like someone that, it still wasn't appropriate to make that comment, but like knew me well enough. And, so I don't like to say the word boomers, but like, there's just different parenting techniques from different generations. So like, how do you respond when people are like, don't quite get it, or maybe make comments like that, like like they need to be put in a corner or something like that? They just don't get it. How do you respond?
It depends on where you are as far as like how many spoons you have, like, because in a moment like that, when your kid is freaking out, it's hard on you, right? And so if you feel that you have the capacity to educate, there's nothing wrong with that. You can calmly say to the person, hey, yeah, that's kind of what it looks like, but here's what's really going on. And you can give an explanation. But if you don't have the spoons for that, you can just say, thanks for your opinion, just move on. Like, there's no need to engage. And honestly, there's like a level where some of these people who, I hate to say these people, different backgrounds have different experiences have different tolerance levels for how well they will engage you.
Yes.
If you have a different idea, right? So like, sometimes it's like talking to a brick wall, and there's really no point, if that person is not in your life in a regular basis, in trying to argue. But if you feel that you can make a difference, or if you want to give an opposing viewpoint and you're up for it, I say go ahead, and try to educate as best you can. So, yeah.
Okay, that's good for people to know. And then also, this is making me realize that a lot of people might have spouses. You're when you're like they
Oh,
can't do
yeah.
multi-step process, and I'm like, I know of so many like marriages who are like, I asked him to do this, this, and this, and he can't do it.
Yeah.
Obviously sometimes it could be laziness, but I do think genuinely most of the time, it probably is just like a processing thing. So how people who are married and are like, oh my gosh, maybe my spouse is just mildly ADHD or something like that.
Mhm.
Maybe they don't want to pursue diagnosis, but do you have any recommendations for people who are thinking, oh, this actually might be affecting our marriage and I didn't even realize that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I actually have a marriage workbook that kind of talks about this, but like as just for like general information, I think coming from a cooperative standpoint and saying, hey, I've noticed that this is hard when, you try to do XYZ. Or like I know men, I've been married for 24 years. So I always try to like before I approach my husband with something I would like him to change, I always try to focus on what he's done well. So I'll be like, hey, honey, I really appreciate that you were able to fix the drain upstairs. I was wondering, though, I've noticed when I need to do, this specific task and I ask you for help, it's hard for you. Is there a way that I can help you with that? Like, so coming at it from like, what can I do to support you? How can I help you?
Okay.
And then there are also just small, subtle things you can do. Like, I'm a big proponent of, if you want the dishwasher loaded a certain way, taking a photo of how you want it loaded and then putting a picture up there and just being like, not in a passive aggressive way, just like, let's have a happy dishwasher, and putting the picture up. Or having a list of things to do. And I do this for the kids a lot, like how to clean your room, like pick the stuff up off the floor, put your clothes away, or just having reminders. And then like if you don't want to like call your husband out and say like, hey, I think you need these, you can just say, I'm putting this up for me as a reminder for myself, and then he might actually start using it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a matter of like respecting what your husband needs. How can I help you right now with this particular task? And then supporting him in quiet, kind of subtle ways without making him feel like you are harassing him,
Yeah.
or nagging him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, that's super helpful. I like that. So now I want to move on to kind of your work. You weave together neuroscience, lived experience, and the lives of the saints, which I think is what makes you unique because there are obviously lots of people talking about neurodivergency out there, but you come at it from a Catholic perspective, which is very, very unique, and I love that. So why is this connection important to you, and how can it help other Catholic women navigate raising neurodivergent kids, or maybe they're neurodivergent themselves?
yeah. Again, I think it goes back to the whole idea of typical and holy and what that means. So if you look back at the saints, there are so many of them. I mean, none of them were typical, obviously, because they're saints, right?
Yeah.
But there are so many of them. You read stories about, behaviors that they had, habits they had, characteristics. And I think this first really occurred to me when I learned about Zélie Martin. I was a really young mom. My oldest was 3. And I read a quote from her that said something to the effect of, I'm already exhausted. If this continues, I'll be dead by this evening. Everything looks black to me. And I thought, what in the world? Like, this is a saint. Like, saints are supposed to say things like that. And so I started doing more research. And that's how I discovered, everything that she had written about Saint Therese, about, Therese's tantrums, how headstrong she was. And then Leonie, who really, by all accounts, based on, what I've read about her and what they've written about her, she was most likely autistic, especially with her tendency to get overwhelmed as far as sensory things. She would hide in the corner with her hands over her ears and just cower there. She had massive, massive, long meltdowns. So much so that her mother really, she felt like, I will never be able to raise this child. I don't know. She wrote in one of her letters about how she felt that she didn't even know if Leonie would get to heaven because she couldn't, I guess in her words, she couldn't fix what was not wrong with her, but what was happening to her. She couldn't change these things. And then she, poor Leonie was, abused by the family's maid a little bit. And then eventually they sent her off to live with an aunt. And it was there that the aunt finally, I think, recognized what was going on with her and was able to give her more structure. And Leonie really flourished. So I think, we can't ignore, I mean, the great thing about Catholicism that I've always loved is that we are a people of science. The Catholic Church has always been at the forefront of scientific discovery. We don't ignore that aspect and we embrace it, right? And I think it's the same thing. Like, we can't look at brain science and, the amazing brains that God has created without acknowledging that everyone through history has probably had some variation of brain wiring. I mean, it's not a new thing.
Yep.
So I think that's what really drew me to looking at the saints as potentially having neurodivergent traits. Obviously not diagnosing them, but like Carlo Acutis, his hyperfocus on Eucharistic miracles was amazing. Now, obviously, a lot of that is grace from God, but that's also an ADHD trait, hyperfocus. People think ADHD means that you can't pay attention to anything. What it really means is that you have a hard time focusing on things that aren't of interest to you. And when something is of interest to you, you will follow it to the very end. And that's what he did. So I think that is why it's important to be able to look at it from that perspective. And I think also there are pockets of the church that view saints as, these perfect beings. And none of them were, because they were all human. And so I think that matters to us as well, to neurodivergent families, because we also have the capability of being saints. And, our ADHD, our autism, our OCD, that is not going to preclude us just in and of itself. Obviously, things that we do as a result of that, choices we make, we all fall into sin. But having a diagnosis does not preclude you from holiness.
That's really, really helpful. And I love that you talk about Zaylee. She is a fantastic saint for so many things, just her business mindset, but then all the things she went through as a parent. Like, if you are looking for a new saint to read about, you need to learn about her, because she is like fascinating. So many people can relate to her on so many levels. So I love that. I love that you look at the lives of the saints and all of that too. So in your book, you introduce the idea of asynchronous development. Can you, before we kind of dive into that, what is asynchronous development?
Yeah. Asynchronous development is when, and you'll see this a lot with really intellectually gifted kids or, kids who are otherwise neurodivergent. They are incredibly talented and advanced in some ways. And then don't like to use the word behind, but delayed in others. So you might have a kid, let me give you an example. My oldest, she was, like I said, she was an advanced reader in advanced classes. She's always been a top student, not necessarily because she was organized, but because she was very smart. But she couldn't ride a bike until she was 12. Or, you might have a kid who gets along really well with adults and has great conversational skills with adults, but cannot relate to same age peers. That is what asynchronous development is. So you'll see advancements in some areas and then delays in others. And it can be really confusing and frustrating because, especially with school, like your kid can do these advanced math equations and yet, writing is a chore, reading is a chore, So yeah, does that explain it a little bit?
Yes, that's very helpful. So for a mom who notices her kids might, have asynchronous development in different areas, what can she do discipline-wise or to help teach her kids? Like what can she do about that? And what would you recommend?
Yeah, it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of understanding that, God's time is his time and not ours. And I think that's something that I've butted up against a lot in my own journey, just as a person, aside from being a mom. But there are ways that you can support a child who is developing in like an uneven manner. And I think the key is finding what are the areas they succeed in, where do they excel, and making sure they know that you see that they're excelling in those ways, and giving like a positive like positive, concrete reinforcement. So not just empty praise, but like, hey, I really like the way you did X, Y, Z. And then on the other hand, looking at the areas where they are struggling or have challenges. And there are programs that you can do. You can do occupational therapy that helps with some of the sensory integration stuff. Or you can do even talk therapy if a child is really struggling with emotional regulation so that they can, begin to even out developmentally in that area. But also working on growth mindset. The idea that, our challenges aren't the end of us, that they're actually stepping stones that we can take to move forward. So learning how to view those obstacles as opportunities for getting better, like learning the power of yet. I haven't gotten there yet, but I will. It's just going to take time. Because I think neurodivergent kids also tend toward perfectionism, or, they're very easy to, or they're very, not easy to, it's easy for them to get frustrated and want to say, I'm awful. I can't do this. There's no point. Why am I even trying? And then I think, you can tie in redemptive suffering as sort of a standpoint from like jumping off, but that it can be hard to help kids understand that. So the idea, I think, growth mindset is a way to bring it closer to them and to their level of understanding. So.
Okay, that's very helpful. So what age, because these signs can be recognized, in toddlerhood, but what age would you recommend kind of just letting, going to see if there is a diagnosis at all? Because some of these things also are like, can be confused with just normal toddlerhood of tantrums and meltdowns, but even sometimes toddlers who aren't neurodivergent do have meltdowns. So how do you know when the time is to go get evaluated?
I think it depends on your family constellation and how things are going. Again, the whole quality of life issue. Like if you are unable to attend mass as a family, if you are unable to go to family functions, or if you are, at your wit's end walking on eggshells around the house, if you feel in your gut that something is wrong with your toddler, then, or not something is wrong, something is different, and that you're not capable of handling it, that I think is a good reason to look into it in the preschool age. And you can talk to, if you have your kid in preschool, talking to preschool teachers, they can give you like a basic developmental, like, here are the milestones we like to see. And kids meet milestones at all different, levels and different time frames. But I think there are some things like the ability to, language development. Obviously, if that is far behind, that's something you're going to want to look at. And then when they're older, I think it's a matter of how well they're doing and how happy they are, because if your kid is always unhappy, if your kid is beginning to say things about how they don't like themselves or how they wish that they weren't around anymore, that's when we knew it was an issue. I mean, with my oldest, it was obviously she was struggling in kindergarten. That was the big sign. But for the other two, it was a matter of like self-disclosing that they didn't really want to live anymore. And this is when they were like 6 or 7, so those are things you don't expect a 6 or 7-year-old to say. So, and with the case with those two, they both have OCD. So they were dealing with some really terrible intrusive thoughts that they couldn't understand and they couldn't fight. So I don't know that I think the best guideline would be following your gut and looking at the quality of life for your family and the quality of life for your child, and then making a decision from there.
Okay, that's really helpful. And is this genetic? Because I know you said you tend to be neurodivergent and all your kids are. Is it genetic?
Yeah.
It can be. Okay.
It can be. I mean, I think actually I would say yes, it is. There are some cases where you have things like PANS or PANDAS, where that is not genetic. That is like an immune system response that can cause symptoms similar to neurodivergent diagnoses. But for the most part, like if I look at my family, all of my family members on my mom's side have struggled with some form of anxiety or OCD. On my dad's side, lots of ADHD. Like my father passed away about 20 years ago. But he was one of the most scattered, goofy, intelligent, like absolutely looking back, he was 100% ADHD. I'm sure of it, right?
Yes.
And then on my husband's side, he has, we have family members who are on the spectrum, and then a lot of anxiety, a lot of mood disorders. So yeah, I mean, you can definitely trace it back. My mother-in-law talks about how, all of her sisters married quirky engineers, and so now all of the kids are quirky. But yeah, no, I definitely would say that it's genetic for sure.
Okay. And then what about environmental? Because I feel like it could just be that we're finally recognizing things more, but I feel like diagnoses keep going up and up and up. Do you feel like there's an environmental factor there? And do you see, in people who do have diagnoses, have they made any lifestyle changes like cutting out all dyes or cutting out sugars or seed oils? Has anything like that made a difference in the lives of anyone that you know?
I have a complicated relationship with all of that, because one of the things that really got me is when my oldest was younger, the number of people who were like, have you tried this diet? Have you tried the Weston A. Price? Have you tried have you taken, have you just tried not catering to her food preferences? I'm like, yes, I've tried all of that. I think what my whole take on this is that there can be environmental factors. So, for example, when my oldest was 2, up until that point, she was, I think, developing what you would consider typically, right? Then we discovered through a routine blood test that she had high levels of lead in her system. And we had everything in the house tested. And it turned out it was our mini blinds, which had been installed, I guess, in the 80s. This was an old house. It was built in the late 70s. I never thought to change out my mini blinds, but she would go and look out the window, and then she'd put her fingers in her mouth. So when the health inspector came to our house and we handed over the mini blinds, we said to him, is this going to have an impact on her in the future? And he said, it's hard to say. One day when she's in high school, she could have trouble with math, and you might look back and say, I wonder if. And, eventually down the line, we got an autism diagnosis. So I'm very careful about how I want to word this. I want to make sure I say it correctly. So I apologize for pausing. But I think there is always a genetic predisposition. There may be environmental factors that will trigger that to turn on.
Yes.
But I am not the kind of person who will blame a neurodivergent diagnosis on something like a vaccine or a medication. I think that parents absolutely have the right to make those decisions for their children, especially if you have a family history of that. And I think there are supplements. A lot of kids who are neurodivergent have a hard time metabolizing B vitamins. So methylfolated B vitamins are really helpful. Okay. There are things like magnesium that can help with anxiety. NAC is another one, especially helps with kids who are skin pickers. I have skin pickers in my house. But I also think that it's not something that we can absolutely say, well, this is definitively the cause of autism. Right. I don't think that there is one cause. I think it's genetic in nature, and I think it's a matter of how things are turned on and how they fall out. So. Yeah.
Love that. And I think that's how most health things are. I think, there's genetic dispositions to this or that, and then the environment can, sway one way or another. So yeah, I completely agree with that. I love that. So for the mom listening right now who's feeling overwhelmed or wondering if she's failing her child spiritually or emotionally, what's the message you would like to leave her with today?
That she's not. She's not a failure. She's not failing her kids. That, she's doing the best she can with the information she's got right now. And that's huge. That's all we can ever do. And I think the other thing is that the idea that right now is not forever, that how things are right now, whatever struggles you are facing right now, whatever struggles your kid is facing right now, it's not going to be that way forever. And I can say that with confidence, having raised one child to adulthood, I have another one in high school, I have one about to go into middle school. The things that I worried about when my kids were 4, 5, 6, even, 10, 11, 12, I can remember thinking they will never be able to do X, Y, Z, or this will always be a thing, or I will always be sleeping in this kid's bed. They'll be going off to college and I'll be in a suitcase because they can't sleep in their dorm without me. None of those things have come true, right?
Mhm.
There have been other problems, other challenges, other things that we've faced, but right now is not forever,
Mhm.
and it will get better. It might not seem like it, but it will.
Thank you so much for saying that. I know so many moms are just probably like internally crying or actually crying hearing that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Ginny, where can everyone find you?
I'm at Quirky Catholic Kids, everywhere,
Awesome.
online, on social media. Yeah. So
Awesome. And then you also had a book come out recently through Sophia Institute Press. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's Quirky Catholic Kids, Navigating Neurodivergence with Faith and Joy. It's kind of like my primer. I've written a lot of books on specific topics, but I didn't. Slow down, Ginny. I talk so fast. My
Me
words
too.
catch up. Yeah. I did not have a primer for helping parents understand what was going on with their kids and even themselves. So I had the opportunity, through Sophia Institute Press, which was really an honor, to be able to put together this book. And the first half focuses on, the practical mindset of shifting how you think about neurodivergence, how you think about the way other people think about you, and your relationship with God. And then the second part is practical strategies that you can use in your home for a lot of the more common neurodivergent challenges. And then I've got a saint for every challenge, and then an index of 100 patron saints for neurodivergent kids. So.
Love it. Well, I will link all that in the show notes, like always. Ginny, thank you so much for being here today. It was so much fun to talk to you. And also, thank you so much to our sponsors of this episode, North Idaho Tallow, Those Who Mourn, and Trinity Tree Publishing. If this episode helped you, please share it with a friend, a mom friend, a sister, maybe your mom, who's the grandma of your kids, just anyone who would benefit from this episode. Sharing the show is the best thing you can do. And thank you all again for being here. I will see you in 2 weeks.